What does a Islamist dictatorship monarchy want with American K through 12 or higher ed institutions?
Today is Wednesday, June 17th. This is Boundless Insights, and I'm Aviva Klompas. Qatar is a tiny country, smaller than Connecticut with a population of roughly 300,000 people. Yet according to a new report from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Qatar has invested more than $400 billion in the United States over the past 15 years. That money touches nearly every corner of American life: universities, think tanks, lobbying firms, real estate, energy infrastructure, defense, professional sports, and even K-12 education. And the big question we should all be asking is, why? Why would a country this small spend so much money cultivating influence in the United States? What does it hope to gain? And why have so many American institutions been willing to accept that money with relatively little scrutiny? Those questions have become more pressing as Americans have taken a closer look at Qatar's role in hosting Hamas leaders, promoting Islamist movements, and positioning itself as an indispensable intermediary in the Middle East. To discuss all this, I'm joined today by Jonathan Schanzer, Executive Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and one of the authors of this new report. Let's get into it. Jonathan, welcome back to Boundless Insights.
Good to be with you again, Aviva.
You have a new report out that estimates that Qatar has poured more than $400 billion into the United States since 2010. That is an astonishing figure. But before we get into the details of where that money went, what is it that people need to understand about Qatar that they may not currently understand?
Okay, Qatar is a country that is half the size of New Jersey. It has 330,000 citizens. It is essentially a mafia family with a seat at the UN. It controls 12% of the world's energy, which is why I call it a mafia family. I mean, it's got this kind of monopoly on energy. It's got bottomless wealth, and it is a jihadi supporting monarchy / dictatorship. It supports Hamas, that we all know after this war, but also the Muslim Brotherhood, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and ISIS figures have found shelter there over the years. It's a bad regime that has been up to its eyeballs in bad activity, illicit finance, and yet it is also considered to be a major non-NATO ally of the United States. We have our largest air base in the Middle East in Qatar at Al Udeid. They're arsonist and firefighter. As my late grandmother used to say, with one tuchus, you can't dance at two weddings. They're dancing at both. When you look back at like the Arab Spring, the Qataris were everywhere in support of these Muslim Brotherhood movements that were looking to topple governments.
That's really my question. Is this a monarchy that's looking to reshape the Middle East in its image?
Yes. And what's interesting is that it does so primarily with soft power, with influence and dollars. And they are spending like drunken sailors if they drank. But they it's a violation of the laws of Islam.
If that was legal. Yeah.
Right. It's haram. But they're spending money like drunken sailors. They're not drunken sailors. And they're doing it in European capitals. They're doing it in America. They're doing it in Israel, by the way, too. So there's just all this illicit money that has been sloshing around to buy influence so that they can continue doing what they do around the Middle East. There's a huge amount of illicit financial activity, whether through terrorism or through simple bribery schemes, that is designed to whitewash the image of the Qataris while they continue to engage in supporting all these terror groups and fancy themselves and position themselves to be stalwart American allies.
Now, I think people have heard about Qatari spending when it comes to American universities, but your report is saying higher education is just a sliver of a much larger ecosystem. Can you give us a bigger picture of the funding in American life?
This report was done by my very talented colleague, Natalie Icano. What we decided to do about a year ago was just to collect receipts. I mean, after the $400 million plane that was donated by the Qataris to be the next Air Force One, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I was like losing my mind. And people seem to be shrugging like, oh, it's $400 million that the American taxpayer doesn't have to pay. I'm like, are we a charity? Am I taking crazy pills here? Like, how is it that the world's largest economy is like ready to gobble up Qatari money for something like this? It was naked influence buying. And I didn't understand it. So we said, let's go back and let's collect receipts. So that's what Natalie did. And what she did is these were all lowball estimates. The $402 billion, $403 billion, it's on the very low end of what is likely. So in other words, no one can accuse us of saying, well, you inflated your numbers. The actual number, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you listen to the Qataris, they openly say that it actually is 1.2 trillion, okay?
Roughly Elon Musk's new wealth.
Yes, roughly. That's a lot of money, right? And that's just in the United States. That doesn't include London. It doesn't include Paris. It doesn't include Berlin, where we also know that the Qataris are throwing a lot of their money around. And that may be next, by the way, in terms of what we look at. Okay, let's start with just sort of naked influence peddling. The plane was won, but the Qataris have been sponsors of the congressional baseball game here in Washington.
Oh.
Yeah, they're sponsoring White House Correspondents' Dinner parties.
The one where somebody tried to assassinate the president? Did they sponsor that one?
I don't know if it was that one. Yeah, but on top of that, there's like an enormous amount of lobby activity, more so than any other country that is the size of Qatar. They are clearly trying to buy influence in this town, and that bothers me. But then, we went by sector, and, I'll give you just some of what's going on here. $84.6 billion in the defense sector, $24.6 billion in the energy sector, $246 billion in aviation and infrastructure, $8.9 billion in higher ed, $8.5 million, and we can talk about this. This is interesting, in K through 12 education.
I definitely want to talk about that.
To me is just nutters. I don't really understand this. $3.6 million in youth programs, $295.9 million in lobbying and public relations. Okay. $8.9 million in courting government allies, sending people to Doha, providing assistance to regional governments. $22.6 million to think tanks. Here's the part where I remind you that FDD does not take foreign government dollars.
Even before I could ask. Okay.
Never have, never will. We think that's a disgusting practice. $8.9 billion in real estate. Disaster relief, $76.2 million. Medicine, $517 million. Sports, $207 million. They're buying up sports teams, sports washing. $1 billion in media, $156 million in tech. I mean, the financial sector is $26.8 billion. I could go on, but it's an enormous amount of money.
Is any of this illegal?
Some of it likely is.
Explain to us the distinction.
Yeah, I mean, K through 12, I think, would be a violation. I believe there are regulations for schools taking foreign dollars. Now, they're going to be saying that they took it through a foundation, which is now shutting its doors, called QFI, Qatar Foundation International. I believe that the decision may have been influenced in part by the FOIA requests that we started putting out into K through 12 schools.
The Freedom of Information request.
Correct. Higher ed, that, $9 billion, and I think there's more. I think this is a violation of law. I think that the schools have not disclosed FARA, violations freedom of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. I think there's money that's not disclosed at all that needs to be. I think there's hidden dollars here. There are some organizations out there who say that there's somewhere between 13 and 18 billion, so double what has been disclosed to the Department of Ed. Here's the part where I'm just going to ask you, what does a Islamist dictatorship monarchy want with American K through 12 or higher ed institutions? Do they care whether our kids are learning Shakespeare or expository writing, or are they taking STEM classes? Do they really care about how American education is advancing? or are they getting in early to influence American minds? I would tend to think the latter because I don't trust this regime. If it wasn't a major non-NATO ally, it would qualify as a state sponsor of terrorism, literally giving money to terrorist groups that are on our lists. That would qualify them as sponsors of terrorism. And yet we are willingly accepting $400 billion minimum from this country across multiple sectors.
Just looking at the education sector, what does it actually look like? What can we see is the result of their spending in either K-12 or higher education that, as you said, is influencing American minds?
So with higher ed, it's interesting. I mean, there's money that they're just donating to the schools, and we've seen it in a bunch of different universities. But there is this interesting campus that the Qataris have. It's called Education City. And Cornell, Northwestern, Texas A&M, Virginia Commonwealth, they entered into an agreement with the government of Qatar to essentially create satellite campuses overseas. It's not the same school, but you've got the branding for it. And there are these MOUs. There was this somewhat famous battle where Texas A&M did not want to disclose the terms of the deal that it entered into with the Qataris. We're now watching Northwestern. They had a relationship with Al Jazeera, this anti-Semitic, vitriolic, anti-American, anti-Israel, pro-Islamist television network. And they had a partnership with the school, which has a terrific journalism program, the Medill School, right? It really did look like the Qataris were kind of news washing Al Jazeera, if you will. I was deeply uncomfortable with that. And I'm deeply uncomfortable with what we're seeing in the K through 12 space. One thing that we found was that QFI was moving money through Georgia, through some academic institutions there, and that curriculum was then being handed down into some of the public schools in and around the Atlanta area. The good news is, thanks to this research that we did, the Georgia legislature moved quickly to demand all disclosures. I would have preferred to see a complete shutdown of all foreign funding. But, we're seeing some action being taken here because, look, American education needs to be American. You could say, well, we don't want autocrats or dictators to have a say in our education. It's more than that. I don't want Canada influencing our education, except on hockey, of course, because that's vital to our education.
Mm-hmm.
There should not be Brits or French or Germans in our education system. If money's coming in and there are arrangements that require teachers to do that's insane.
That's what I'm asking about. Is that money essentially making hiring decisions about people that are going to be making key decisions on what the curriculum is? If we're talking about universities, about how the campuses are responding to anti-American or anti-Israel acts, anti-Semitic acts, is it actually about what is being taught to young American students? Is it about bringing Americans to Qatari campuses where they'll be exposed to anti-American ideas?
So it varies. In K through 12, we have seen some of the contracts, and the contracts bother me because it appears that there's some sort of quid pro quo, that teachers and students are actually being monitored by the grant maker, and that should not be happening. There should not be any quid pro quo here. With higher ed, I think there's something interesting that I have been arguing since October 8th. And that is that, the Qataris are dishing out big checks. Those big checks are really valuable for these universities. When you have these big checks and you are a fundraiser or an administrator for a university, and then you see what happens on these campuses, after October 7th, and you know that the money is easier to raise it by going to one place, and it's like the equivalent of hundreds of donations from across your alumni network. You can start to ignore your alumni network. So the influential Americans who have, it's not insignificant funds. You're giving your school, your alma mater, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, $50,000. It is still a drop in the bucket compared to those millions of dollars that the Qataris are donating. And so If the Qataris say, hey, we think that Hamas is a legitimate resistance organization and we're okay with this, they don't even need to say it out loud. It's implied, it's known. And so you see, university presidents coming out and talking about context as opposed to the values of their schools. And I think that the Qataris have done an enormous amount of damage. They're not alone, by the way. I mean, the Chinese are in there, although it's interesting to note, we know that they've been trying to influence us for decades. The Qataris have surpassed the Chinese in their giving to American universities.
Well, China has TikTok. They're getting to us in other ways.
So are the Qataris getting to us in other ways through Al Jazeera English, through AJ Plus, which should have been registered as a FARA entity, a foreign agent, back in 2020.
Jonathan, you've mentioned FARA a couple times. Just give a brief explanation of what it is so people can understand.
Sure. It's the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It dates back to like World War II.
This was the Soviet era.
Yes. It is an amorphous law, but it basically says that if you are taking money and if you are taking direction from a foreign government,
not just a government, from any foreign
from
entity,
foreign principal, that you need to register.
That the American government should be aware.
Correct.
You might not be acting entirely altruistically.
Correct. You may be acting at the behest of a foreign actor. Now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't advocate for a relationship with a foreign government. You could truly believe that, that Israel is a great ally to the United States and that we need to double down on that. You don't need to register for FARA by doing so. You could say the same thing about the Turks or even the Iranians for that matter. And there are plenty of people that advocate for those things, as much as I disagree with them, in ways that are legal. But the moment that they start taking direction from a foreign government or taking funding from a foreign government is the moment that you have to start to question. Now, when you start to see some of these schools taking dollars from the Qataris and embracing their general messaging approach to the conflict in the Middle East, their approach to Hamas, their approach to Israel. By the way, I mean, some of these schools, we've seen the maps that have been provided. Guess what country's missing from those maps? Give you one guess.
Israel?
Oh, ding, 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 ding. Brilliant. At any rate, you get a sense of kind of what's going on here. It's murky. I would say that I'm deeply uncomfortable with the access that the Qataris have with this administration, A, because of the support that it's been providing these terror groups over time, B, because of the enormous amount of dollars that they're throwing here into the United States, and their objectives are not entirely clear to anybody. There's just a lot of money, and it doesn't seem to be accounted for in ways that satisfy me. But I think the role that the Qataris have played in this war, and it's ongoing, right? I mean, immediately after the hostage crisis, it feels like that is ancient history, right, already.
It hasn't even been a year. They came out October of 25.
That's right. But it already feels like ancient history because the news cycle moves so fast. But the Qataris were the primary interlocutors in getting these hostages out. They were not acting in good faith. They were not interested in actually getting these hostages out. They are pro-Hamas. They are patrons of Hamas. They have Hamas leaders in their country to this day. They have been giving Hamas millions of dollars in support, with a wink and a nod from the Israeli government, by the way, which is deeply troubling. But the point is they were not honest brokers here. And it actually got to the point where the Israelis were so thoroughly convinced that they were not going to actually get the hostages out that the Israelis bombed an apartment building in Doha right before that hostage deal was made. They were not honest brokers back then. Today, they are key players in the negotiation of what appears to be a rather bad Iran deal with the United States.
See our previous episode.
Yes, see that.
Qatar has managed to convince both America and America's enemies that it's utterly indispensable. How does it manage to do this, and why does America fall for it?
Look, on the trust thing, Al Udeid is a $8 billion facility, and it's been paid for out of pocket by the Qataris.
And this well predates this current administration. So this is...
Yes. And what they've done is they've built upon years of buying off American officials, not in the sense that they're being bribed, but in the sense that like, hey, let's do this for you, all right? We're going to give you money for this, right? For Al Udeid. And they're like, $8 billion. We get to specify how it's built. It's a secure facility and it's right near the action. By the way, I would argue that right now, after it's been hit, we may want to move it. It's too close to the action. And I would argue that it's a target for the Islamic Republic and it's too easy of a target. So at some point, we still may need to move. And I think that it's something that we need to think about really carefully. But they've bought things that we need and they put money in places that we want. And so it's become very convenient for the Qatari money to be where it is. And it's hard for us to turn it down. Now, the other thing that I think we need to note is that it has been bipartisan, right? It was, I think, under George W. Bush was when Al Udeid was actually established. It was created. The Obama administration relied heavily on the Qataris during the Arab Spring. I think errantly. I think it was a huge error in judgment to do that, but they were trying to bring the Arab Spring revolts to a soft landing, and the Qataris said that they could help. It was a bit like inviting the fox into the hen house because these are the key patrons of the Muslim Brotherhood. But we were gullible and we decided to do that. That was under Obama. During Trump, the relationship was good. During Biden, the Biden administration, that's when they declared them to be major non-NATO allies. In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we needed the natural gas, which of course the Qataris are flush in. And so it's been a bipartisan backslide, a bipartisan error to trust this regime. And what we're trying to do right now is to shed light on exactly where that money is. And I think at some point, we really do need to figure out how to filter it. Not every one of these investments is buying influence. Not every one of these investments would be considered malign. I think the country itself is absolutely corrupt and awash in just, they've got blood on their hands. They are dirty.
Could we give a generous reading to what this administration or even previous administrations are doing, which is to say that Qatar is ideologically aligned with America's enemies, and there is a choice to be made because they are very, very rich. If we were to oppose them, that would entrench their alignment and their money and support to countries like Iran. But if we use more of this carrot approach and we try to draw them over to the Western side or align them more with the Gulf states, maybe then it'll mitigate their ideological investments. Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility, but let me just say,
But not a probability.
not a probability. And I think we need to do a better job of telling our allies what it means to be an ally of the United States. You cannot be a close ally of the United States while simultaneously supporting Hamas, the Brotherhood, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS.
It's so clear and reasonable when you say that.
Yeah, right? Like be a normal country and you could be a normal ally. I think that should be the arrangement.
That should be our motto.
Be a normal country, would you?
Jonathan, it is always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me on.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Boundless Insights. Whether you've been with us from the start or are just discovering our show, we're so glad you're here. If today's conversation sparked a question, challenged your thinking, or made you shake your head, I want to hear from you. Email me at podcast@boundlessisrael.org. Your feedback gives us ideas for new topics and new guests. And if you believe these conversations matter, there are 3 ways to support the show. First, hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. Second, help us spread the word. Share an episode with friends and family, post about it, or mention it in a group chat. It really does make a difference. And third, consider supporting our work. Boundless is a nonprofit, and we rely on donors to keep the show going. You can make a gift at boundlessisrael.org/donate. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep the conversation going.